we're going to get started here. Hello, everyone. I'm glad you're here today and on Zoom. Thank you so much for being here for The Greater Good, part 4 of our mini-series, the last and final show, Urbanizing for the People. This event was made possible by our moderator, our panelists, speakers, and partners, and supporters, and People's Forum, and you, of course. Without you guys, we wouldn't have a forum here. Thanks for showing up. My name is John Mudd. I'm Executive Director of the Midtown South Community Council, and I've been living in Midtown since 1984. And the council has been around just as long. We focus on society's basic needs: health, housing, and food. The health before profits, rent is too damn high, and saving public housing highlighted the causations and fixes for the worsening health and housing crisis. Our health forum taught us that the relationship between government and private industry is unhealthy for us. It's toxic and detrimental to our survival. Our housing forums revealed corporatism's cancer creep. We are being financialized out of existence. So what are long-term transformative, stabilizing fixes that will allow you and me and everyone else to thrive? Bold and innovative urban planning with the public in mind will bring us back to the precipice of collapse and breathe new life into our future and city. Urbanizing for the Public will bookend the series as it maps humane paths to follow for the greater good. Tonight, our brilliant moderator, Samuel Stein, with our panelists, will break down our destructive development policies and discuss how urbanizing for the people would create a more equitable, humane society. Samuel Stein is a geographer and an urban planner who studies and writes about politics of planning in New York City, with an emphasis on housing, real estate, labor, and gentrification. He is a housing policy analyst at the Community Service Society of New York. He worked for New York City housing labor institutions such as Tenants and Neighbors, Service Employees International Union Local 32BJ. You'll have to tell me about that one. He's taught geography and urban studies at Hunter College, Parsons School for Design, Sarah Lawrence College, and the CUNY School of Labor and Urban Studies, and John Jay. He is a member of the steering committee for the Planners New York Network and the Organization of Progressive Planning. Samuel Stein is an author of the book Capital City, Gentrification and the Real Estate Industry. He's contributed to several books, projects, including Zoned Out, Race and City Planning in New York City, Immigrant Crossroads, Globalization, Incorporation, and Placemaking in Queens, New York and Transformative Planning, Radical Alternatives to Neoliberal Urbanism. His scholarly writings has been published in such journals as Urban Affairs Review, International Planning Studies, and Journal of Urban Affairs, and his essays have been published in The Guardian, Jacobin, The Baffler, and many other magazines and journals. Now you can check out our panelists and our moderator's bio on forthegreatergood.format.com, and it'll give you a bio, where to contact them, to hound them to see where you can help, and because we need you involved in the fight. And I'm going to turn this over to Samuel Stein so he can begin his discussion.
All right. Thanks a lot. Thank you all for coming. Thank you to John for hosting and the Midtown South Community Council. As John said, this is the 4th and final panel in the For the Greater Good series. Previous sessions featured discussions on housing and health, homelessness and tenants' rights, and preserving public housing. Tonight's topic is a very broad one: urbanizing for the people. That could mean a lot of things, but we've decided to focus on one factor that literally and figuratively underlies every other event in the series, which is the politics of land. In our discussion this evening, we'll be talking about that most precious resource, foundational social relation, and mystified political subject. A lot of scholars and activists over the years have demonstrated that one of the fundamental contradictions in urban planning in a capitalist democracy like ours is the contradiction between the social character of land and the private character of property. All of us exist on and through land, but only some of us own it and charge others to use it. Arguably, most of what planning is in America is mediating that contradiction between competing fractions of the capitalist class who want different things from the land, and between the capitalist and working classes who also want different things from the land. In this conversation, we might or hope to get into public, private, and collective stewardship of land and the tensions between them, taxation of private land and its relationship to the economic value of the land and what's above it, eminent domain and its relationship to state, corporate, and popular power, and ecology and environmental viability of our land use and planning practices. Our panelists tonight are a distinguished group of scholars, practitioners, and activists with no clear lines of divisions between those identities. I'll introduce them now in alphabetical order, or what I think is alphabetical order. Lynn Lewis is a community organizer, oral historian, and popular educator. She's the former executive director of Picture the Homeless, a founding board member of the East Harlem El Barrio CLT Community Land Trust, and a founding steering committee member of NYC, the New York City Community Land Initiative, and Communities United for Police Reform. For the past 6 years, she has worked to develop the Picture the Homeless Oral History Project to document Picture the Homeless's approach to organizing. She's an adjunct at the New School and a trainer and advisor to the Housing Justice Oral History Project there. She has an MA in Oral History from Columbia. Rob Robinson, joining us via Zoom, is a formerly homeless community organizer and activist based in New York City. His work focuses on changing people's fundamental relationship to land and housing. He works with social movements around the world, including the movement of people affected by dams in Brazil, the landless workers movement in Brazil, the shack dwellers movement in South Africa, and the platform of people affected by mortgages in Spain. Rob is the USA-Canada coordinator of International Alliance of Inhabitants, an alliance of 12,000 members worldwide, which supports a zero evictions program. Rob is currently an adjunct professor of urbanism in the Design and Urban Ecology program at Parsons New School University. Miguel Robles-Duran is an urbanist and theorist working at the intersections of urban political ecology, unitary urbanism, and the design of just urban processes. He is a tenured associate professor of urbanism at the New School, Parsons School of Design in New York City, and director of the graduate urban programs. Miguel is a founding partner and co-director of Urban Front, a transnational consultancy for urban justice that supports progressive governments around the globe to develop programs that promote the right to the city. He co-founded, together with David Harvey, Politics in Motion, an anti-capitalist media organization that hosts his podcast and YouTube program, Cities After. Samuel Turvey is chairperson of RethinkNYC. RethinkNYC is an organization dedicated to applying innovative thinking to the future of New York. Sam is co-coordinator of the Empire State Coalition, a group of 15 civic groups, neighborhood association, and think tanks, and also coordinator of the Penn Community Defense Fund. Sam is a longtime community activist and board member in the not-for-profit community. He is a native of Staten Island and has lived and worked in each of New York City's 5 boroughs. Laura Wolfe Powers is professor of urban policy and planning at City University of New York, Hunter College, and a member of the faculty in Earth and Environmental Sciences at the CUNY Graduate Center. She teaches economic development, real estate development, community planning, and political economy. Professor Wolfe Powers' book, University City, History, Race, and Community in the Era of the Innovation District, was published in September 2022 by the University of Pennsylvania Press. Her current research focuses on the political economy of land valuation and property taxation. She is a steering committee member of the Western Queens Community Land Trust. So let's have a round of applause for our panelists. All right, thank you all for doing this tonight. Appreciate it. So that's the framing. We're talking about the politics of land and urban planning and the future of New York City. And the first question I want to ask for everyone to consider, speaking from your own experience as activists and researchers, what do you think is revealed about the issues you're focused on by starting with land itself and our relationships to it, rather than starting with what sits on top of it? If it's okay, I might propose for simplicity's sake that we just sort of move down the line, which would be Miguel, Lynn, Rob, Laura, Sam. Is that cool? All right.
Moderator. Yes, thank you, gracias. Thank you very much for... Yeah, thank you for making me the first person to... Yes, yes, it's true. It was your... because you... Yeah, now I know why. No, thanks for the question. I think it's... I mean, I don't want to get into very deep answers into it, but, you know, one of the things that I have learned the most from reading Marx has been this incredible emphasis he puts on understanding the abstractions of capital or of capitalism. So basically how goods circulate, I mean, questions of labor processes and, of course, accumulation and overaccumulation, fictitious capital, all of those sort of terminologies that come from his teachings. But at some point, Marx was also very adamant in mentioning that these abstract processes need to materialize at some point. Otherwise, they make no sense, right? So one could argue, and I think Marx did that very well in chapter 25, Capital, Volume 1, that we must look at capitalism from its material reality, right? Which is a lot of what he talks about. Now, that material reality, of course, addresses land. And land becoming one of the principles of, according to his teachings, of capitalist accumulation, amongst other things. Now, what is so important, at least for me, of focusing on land rather than on all of these abstractions, which I do focus, but I always place an emphasis on the material reality in the material world, is that it is such a concrete thing for us to work around. No, it does not require this deep knowledge of Marxist terminology or anything of that to be able to engage and to understand that we live in a condition where it's fundamentally unequal, and one of the bases of this inequality is the way in which land has been hoarded by putting so much emphasis on questions of private property at large, right? And so I think it's very simple for everyone, I mean, to see how unequal this is. And that's, for me, one of the greatest sort of things that I see when we discuss questions of capitalism, to always confront them with what is in front of us. And that material reality is true. I mean, and of course, in New York City, we live in such, such conditions of inequality that it's even easier, to understand this. And the majority of us in this room will never own anything, right? Because it's just not possible. And the question, of course, is that when we talk about owning, that implies a whole sort of ideology basis in which we see land more as a trading commodity rather than as a situation that of use, of our own benefit. That is also something that I learned from Marx. But with that said, I mean, the focus of my practice for a long time, and one of the things that we emphasize a lot in Urban Front, is that our work must go into first producing frictions into the private property system and pushing for policies or programs or whatever inventions one can come from, working from non-speculative and limited speculation or limited equity property systems that we must sort of imagine, right? How is it possible that we can shift our relationship to that material reality that is so unequal in a way that we take from it its capacity to hoard wealth, to accumulate, and to create this inequality. And so also land provides me with the view of thinking so concretely on that, right? So are we able to actually develop systems and propose and push agendas so that we limit or completely obliterate the possibility of speculating with something that is so fundamental for human existence, which is, the right to house ourselves, or, that which I do believe. So this is how I will put it there. Yes.
Hard act to follow. Is that like revenge because you sat in that chair? Okay. So in the emails leading up to this event, there was a David Harvey quote that I want to read because it got me thinking about the kinds of things I wanted to bring up tonight. And this is the quote: "The question of what kind of city we want cannot be divorced from the question of what kind of people we want to be, what kinds of social relations we seek, what relations to nature we cherish, what style of life we desire, or what aesthetic values we hold." And all of those things happen on land. And for me, we can't really divorce what kind of social relations we seek without thinking about what social relations we have, because we have to construct the path from where we're at, right, to where we want to be. And so this whole question about community control, and who is the we, really speaks to the question of democracy. Because if we're going to look at this from the position of the land that everything is on, including us, it's everyone, right? I don't know if we're thinking about the land on this block, or the land in our neighborhoods where we live, or the earth, right? And so but regardless, we are all, right? It encompasses everyone and everything we do. And so it really makes me think about who gets to decide what happens on the land, and for whose benefit, and at whose expense. Because if someone benefits, right, unless we all benefit, then the benefits are kind of only assigned to some. And that's not because the people that don't benefit said, "Oh, go ahead, y'all, you keep it." It's because of power, and the power that some people have to control. And so we have to be careful when we say we, right? Are we talking about our neighborhood? Are we talking in terms of an identity? Are we talking about everyone should be part of the we? But in order for that to happen, we have to get to know each other, right? And when we think about housing, whether it's, public housing or community land trusts, we also have to think about the commons, because that's where we construct the we. That's where we can engage with people that maybe aren't part of our family or our friends that we invite over to our house, or that we hang out with, right? If we're thinking about land that we all live on, and not just we as human beings, but every living thing. And with climate change, we just can't leave this out, right? Like that, we are in relationship to land and what happens on it. And to the extent that we have any say, we have to make sure that we're not just speaking for a narrow we, but for all of us. And oh, Rob, your turn.
So thank you, Lynn, and thank you to Sam and to John and everybody at the People's Forum for inviting me. I'm coming to you from Atlanta while I am attending Habitat for Humanity's conference. I kind of find myself in a weird place because something I've always spoken about with Miguel, David, Lynn, Sam, and others is how we how are we, I ask this question, how are we complicit in our own problems and our own beliefs, believing in narratives and absorbing narratives uh, that were constructed from a select few of us? You know, Lynn mentioned the we, and the question is, who are those we? So for me, it starts with our Constitution in the US, which protects power and which focuses on elites, right? There's 1% that Constitution was geared towards, and there were 99% of us that were asked out of that equation. And I look at that through the lens of other constitutions around the world written in more modern times. I look at the Constitution of Brazil, post dictatorship, written in 1986, which says land has to serve a social purpose. Growing food, housing people, it's a basic necessity to sustenance for life. Uh, in South Africa, uh, after apartheid fell in 1996, they received a new constitution, and the human right to housing is ensconced in that framework of that constitution. I want to be clear, you don't always realize it, but you do have a foundation to challenge power on with the very fact that it is documented in that constitution. So I think we have an uphill battle, and that's why I'm going to talk more about how you push people to change that fundamental relationship to land. For me, a lot of it is speaking to law school students and challenging them to challenge, as I like to say, the black robes in the courtroom, right? When you go into a courtroom, and I'm not a litigator, so I'm not going to simplify the work that some incredible litigators that I work with have done, but it's a challenge to go into the courtroom to say, people have a human right to a home. It's a challenge to bring people from the community in there to say they have a human right to a home. But I think we have to accept those challenges and take risks, because I almost dare any judge with a stenographer in the room to say you don't have the human right to a home. What judge wants to go on record as being the first judge to say you don't have a human right? The worst that's going to happen is that judge will say, go in the back and see if you can negotiate something. I don't want this in front of me. Well, I think that's a starting point. I think it's a starting point for us to think differently about this relationship. But, you know, I mentioned that I'm at a conference right now, Habitat for Humanity, and what I see is a lot of people who are looking at home ownership and thinking about how it might bring them wealth. And I was specifically brought here, and I'm going to pat myself on the back to say that the program that I teach in, and I work with Miguel in at the New School, has created some students who are lifting up voices like mine to say, okay, here's somebody who has a different narrative. He's not afraid to come into a conference of people that are salivating about the right to own a home. And he challenges those assumptions that you're going to become wealthy or you're going to grow. And until you change that relationship to land, you're going to struggle. And looking at people, when I start to talk to them about the struggles in New York City to acquire land and that air rights are for sale, it blows their minds. So yeah, you might in Sonoma, California, might be able to create a land trust and might be able to build houses that people can buy and sort of make an investment. But what 2008 taught me is anytime a financial institution feels they're at risk, they can manipulate your life so that they don't lose a bit of profit, right? But the people who bought the mortgage or who bought into a system that says purchase this 30-year mortgage or is at risk. That equity can be sucked away from you in a moment's notice. So we can't forget what has happened to the past. We can't forget the history and discrimination around housing. And I think that's the struggle that we face right now. I'll close by saying this. When it comes to land and appreciation of land, I've been blessed to work in the international communities around the world, working with people in the past. I didn't work directly with Berta Casares from Honduras, who was the protector of the waters, but I work with her daughter now and understand how folks and their relationship to land and water looks different than what we have here. There's a different appreciation. And until we catch on to what is happening in places like Latin America and other places around the world where indigenous folks have a different relationship to land, I think we're always going to struggle around this particular issue. But, I think it can be done different. We have to be willing to open up our minds and have a different appreciation of land and our relationship to land. Thank you.
Hi. Okay. Thanks. Thanks for inviting me to this, John, and thank you for that provocative question, Sam. I was sort of scribbling. Rob was talking about a right to housing, and you, Lynn, mentioned the commons, and that kind of provides a backdrop to what I think is a very important relationship between land and citizenship. And when I say citizenship, I don't mean, having a passport of a particular country. I just mean political citizenship or political personhood. And in the Western sort of settler colonial tradition, if that's what you want to call it, the possession of land and the ownership of land has always been associated with political rights. And so, and I think that that's something that doesn't get acknowledged that often in the political conversation, because we just have this idea about land markets, and the market in land is just like any other market. There's supply, there's demand, and there are various actors, and they they're expressing their preferences using dollars and things like that. But I actually teach a real estate development class at Hunter, and on the first day, I asked the students to talk about sort of how they understand the relationship, the role of the government in real estate development, and they think the students typically will think about articles they've read in the New York Times or Curbed or their neighborhood newspapers from wherever they're from, Brooklyn or Queens, and they'll talk about big development projects that they have different opinions about, or they'll talk about zoning. I mean, it's planning school, so everybody's obsessed with zoning, but but they'll talk about land use regulation and the government's ability to change the value of land by making decisions about how high you can build and so forth. But what very few of them kind of, until I pointed out, sort of think about the fact that government has this much more fundamental role in making land development viable and making land development profitable. And that has to do with all kinds of functions, from enforcing contracts to defending territory to ensuring public safety. And then, of course, there's infrastructure. We would not have human settlement without infrastructure provided by government. So government is much more imbricated with sort of the land and land value. It goes the government's involvement goes far beyond, and I think it's important to remember that, because again. Part of the reason that I think, part of what I believe to be the kind of the fount of a lot of the problems that you talked about in the first three panels in this series, has to do with the role of the government with respect to land and how government makes all these different kinds of decisions, not only about how to enforce property rights, but also about how to make infrastructure decisions, in addition to regulating development. And so I think we have to think very hard about what role we want government to play in the future. And I know that may be sort of foreshadowing another question that you're going to ask a little bit later on, Sam.
Thank you. And I think you set that up well for me by discussing infrastructure. I don't have the backgrounds that you all have, either in activism or academia, but I'll do the best I can. And say that at today's Penn Station, which is 2 blocks of Manhattan, you learn something that we all know about Manhattan. Every square inch of Manhattan, people are competing for what it's going to be used for, and how, and who owns it, and in what ways, and what sounds will be allowed there. And plugging into some of what you're saying, at Penn Station you have this interesting juxtaposition, is that the basement is owned by the government or by the railroads, And the 2 blocks of basement with some tentacles north, south, east, and west processes 600,000 people a day, which is the population, or more than the population of city of Boston. So it's a pretty unique piece of real estate. On top of it are 2 private developments, one by the Vornado Realty Company with 2 Penn Plaza. There's some surrounding Vornado properties, and then you have the famous Madison Square Garden in its 4th iteration. And there's been this masochism tango going on there for a few years, and it relates to some of the land issues that you're talking about, in that these 2 blocks that process 600,000 people have the opportunity, if the proper policies are implemented and we unified our regional rail through that 2-block site, to materially improve the quality of life for everyone in this region, probably to about 75 miles out. And because of the fact that this is where 10% of the gross domestic product of this nation happens, and 20 to 23 million people live, you would be conferring a tremendous public benefit if you did that and modernized that station and did it right. Instead, they have allowed the Vornado Realty Company, with the help from Andrew Cuomo at first and now Governor Hochul, to create a development-oriented plan for the neighborhood and do project some of the public-private partnerships. I'm not opposed to all of them. I certainly have been vehemently opposed to this one. And they want to, frankly, snuff the opportunity to do this transit plan right for people. And it's perhaps as ugly as anything I've ever seen, but I know I'm biased. I have taken to saying, my father had a good friend on Staten Island who was from Tennessee, and he used to speak to us at picnics and the like and explain how much Franklin Roosevelt meant to them because of the Tennessee Valley Authority. And that's when you take the government and you help everybody. Now, our own Jane Jacobs, I don't have the quote in front of me, but she has that great quote, say, cities work best when the solutions come from everybody. And unifying regional rail at Penn Station, which would make Patterson, Newark, Jamaica, Sunnyside, you name it, more relevant economically, and balanced and sustained economic growth in this region, I really struggle. It's not entirely responsive to your question, but I really struggle how we could allow the land that really should be a train station to be co-opted by these private interests, and struggle to get the government to see things right. I even issued an editorial a few weeks ago to Amtrak, MTA, and New Jersey Transit and said, stop railroading Amtrak Joe. He can't understand why he's not getting any credit for his infrastructure bill. Well, he let people hijack $50 billion of spending, which could really help all New Yorkers in housing, education, the environment. It's a sad thing. So, onward.
All right, well, that was kind of a fascinating move from abstraction to very particular reality, and maybe we can keep that spirit of covering it all as we go forward. I'd like, the next question that I had prepared touches on things that a few people brought up. So, building on what you've already said, New York housing and planning movements seem to be divided over what kinds of entities we want to empower to steward the land. There are calls for stronger state power, such as the proposal for a social housing development authority to acquire land and build permanently affordable social housing at the New York State level. There are also calls for the state to change land use rules to allow developers to build more private housing with less intervention from the state. And there are calls for collective entities like community land trusts to play a greater role in controlling larger parcels around the city. So what do you make of these different strategies and visions? Where do you think they overlap, and where do you think they're incompatible? And I probably should have said this before, but it didn't occur to me now. It might be interesting to start from the most specific and get to the abstract and go in the reverse order we just went in. So to repeat the question, we have calls for more public power, we have calls for more developer private power, and we have calls for this sort of community power. What do we make of that? Are they potentially overlapping, or are they conflicting? And how do the projects that you're working on reflect that sort of divided call?
Well, I would say a couple things. First of all, while we're talking about the whole region at Penn Station, we very much have said that the community board and the New York City authorities should get back into the game. The state override, which is how we got into this awful place, is not very good. Now, in terms of housing, which we definitely support affordable housing and have said that it needs to be part of whatever they do in the Penn neighborhood, and others are pressing it harder, such as John. It's a broader part of his charter. But I think there probably is room for a few solutions in a given region or area, and sometimes these different approaches can compete with one another. The idea that the Empire State Development Corporation foisted this thing on Midtown Manhattan, and the mayor just sat on his hands and said nothing about it. That was really foolish. I just happened to be in Ann Arbor, I was saying, and while it's a pittance, Governor Whitmer just gave $71 million out to allow the housing authorities to fight blight and build affordable housing with land trusts. And I said, this sounds like everything we're all talking about, except there need to be a lot more zeros after the $71 million. But what I would say, and then I'll stop hamming it up, but part of the reason what they're doing at Penn Station is they're saying it's blighted. That's not blight. Detroit, you want to see what real blight is, you go to some sections of Detroit. So it's good to see there that blight isn't in the hands of the developers and the Empire State Development Corporation who bastardized it. The state housing authority's in charge of it. Now, I know many of you have probably had bad experiences with our counterparts, but that's why I say sometimes there's a great public option. There can be great private options, not all the time. But I think I like to see a little competition and try to see which works best. But I definitely think the closer you are to the community, the better off you are.
Okay. Yes, this is a question I've been thinking a lot about. I don't think I have a resolved answer, but I actually taught a studio course last fall in which the students were working with the concept of a social housing development authority for New York State. And that is now a piece of legislation that was just introduced in the state legislature by Emily Gallagher and Senator Cordell Clear. So, and you mentioned the Empire State Development Corporation, and I agree with you that ESD has played a role. It has used its power to promote wealth accumulation by people who already have plenty of wealth, not only at Penn Station, but also at Atlantic Yards in Brooklyn and in many other situations. And so one question that that really keeps me up at night is, if we create a state social housing development authority, its bylaws, at least superficially, look very similar to those of the Empire State Development Corporation. But what is the mechanism by which we would make that particular state authority more accountable, more democratically controlled, and kind of more laser focused on a mission which is broadly public, to maximize, to build and preserve as many units of deeply affordable housing as can possibly be built and preserved, in our flawed housing finance system. And I think so I haven't answered this question, Sam, but I've kind of, I think, hopefully demonstrated the contradiction of which you speak, in the sense that some people think of a state instrumentality for development like ESD as, we never want to do anything like that again. And yet there are these possibilities that emerge when people sort of reconceptualize what a state authority might do and how it might be structured. Oh, sorry.
We're going to go to Atlanta now.
Hello, New York City. Rob coming to you from Atlanta. Sam, I think, much like Laura, I don't know if I have the perfect answer for this question, but what I will say is I do think, as Sam touched on, that it should be closer to the community, right? What the community needs should be determined by communities. And history tells me that doesn't always happen. And Laura mentioned Atlantic Yards, and that's, the poster child for me. And you speak of eminent domain, how things can be snatched away from you and given to power brokers to determine what your life might look like in the future. And I think that's problematic. But I also think there are some problems within our basic communities and community organizing where we all have separate ideas of what we want. It looks different. Some of it is determined by philanthropic dollars, which can pollute our thinking because sometimes we salivate to get to dollars. And I don't want to cast aspersions upon anybody. You need resources to do the work, but maybe we have to figure out a different way to do that work. And I don't know if we'll ever agree. The sexy thing right now is social housing. It is sexy. It could be good. But then what does that mean to public housing, which we're already struggling with now? Does the government snatch away all the resources and lean towards social housing if that's what we start yelling for? So I think we really have to think through these issues. You raised an interesting question here, Sim, and I don't know if we can answer right now. My answer would be a practical one. We need to do a better job, and I include myself in this group as activists, organizers, educators, of educating our communities. Right? We don't do the popular and political education to help people understand what they're facing, and I think that's a real need, and that's something that's sorely lacking in our city. Thank you.
Yeah, I hear a lot of my own thoughts kind of popping up in my co-panelists' comments. And it's so funny, the framing of the question, public power, developers, and community power. Because I think we have this assumption sometimes that the public power is the community power, right? But it's not. Because of these mechanisms that either exclude folks or a lack of political and public education where there's meetings, but there's a little notice about it in the back page of the Daily News or something, and so no one knows and no one can go. But even the work leading up to that, of really thinking through, as a community member, it's really easy to say what we don't want, but it's much deeper work to say what do we want and how do we get there. I don't think that developer interests are consistent with community interests right now. And I say that as somebody who's worked with non-for-profit developers, but they're working within the confines of the financing streams that the city and the state and the federal government create. And so even the most wonderful not-for-profit developer is working within that system. And so they're not creating housing for really poor people because the money's not there. And even our land trust movement is not creating housing for extremely low-income people. It's not solving the folks most harmed by the housing crisis. And that's not because land trusts don't want to do that. It's because the money isn't there. And so I want to tell you a story about eminent domain, bridging the abstract and the practical. And I also want to lift up a group I got to know when I was doing my book, Apache Stronghold. They just got a negative decision in the Ninth Circuit Appeals Court. So they're headed to the Supreme Court, and it's in defense of land, Oak Flats. Sometimes we don't recognize that in the U.S. there are indigenous folks fighting for land rights that is really deeply connected to not just what happens on the land, but actually a spiritual practice and relationship to the land. So Apache Stronghold, look them up. They're going to need the whole country behind their back. But years ago, Picture the Homeless, we did three actually vacant property counts. One was in East Harlem in 2003. Another was the whole borough of Manhattan, a block by block count. And then the third one we did in conjunction with Hunter College, banking on vacancy. And we documented that in 20 out of 59 community boards, there was enough vacant space to house just under 200,000 people. Now, among the buildings that we counted that had vacant apartments, these are buildings that were built before 1974, and they had more than 6 apartments. So with vacancy decontrol, they would be rent stabilized. And I can tell you, I live in East Harlem. I moved into my apartment. It had been vacant for years, and the last previous tenant was paying $300 some in rent. And so I'm rent stabilized. And all of us in my building, we still have cheap rent. I've been there for 24 years. So some of these buildings in East Harlem that are still vacant, that are privately owned, their last rent of record was probably just a couple $100s. So we had a lot of conversations with folks from tenant and neighbors, from Met Council, and kind of schemed like, well, how is this possible? And we calculated that the number of vacant apartments in buildings, right, that met the criteria for rent stabilization almost identically matched the number of families in the homeless shelter system, a little over 14,000 at the time. And so we were brainstorming, okay, well, can we use eminent domain, declare homelessness a public health emergency, which is not that radical of an idea, and offer the owners an option. Look, the state can take your apartment building and fix it up and house people that right now the state was paying $4,000 a month for them to stay in a shelter system. Or pay much less than even the voucher program would pay and just pay $300 a month for you to have a newly renovated apartment. If the landlord said, no, I want to fix up my building, I just don't have the money, create a fund, pay for the repairs, the landlord doesn't get to charge major capital improvement, the rent is still really low. That would still provide a home, a real home, stabilize communities, save the city a shitload of money, but it was, oh no, that's radical, and radical just means we don't currently think like that. It doesn't mean you can't do it. And so there are all kinds of ways. We talked to a lot of housing groups, and people were afraid of eminent domain. Eminent domain can be really bad, and it can be really good. It depends on who benefits. That kind of work could be paired with a community land trust so that those buildings can't be flipped in the future. There are real solutions to this, and I think the main takeaway from tonight or any conversation that we have is this is solvable. And the difference between whether the public interest or a social housing development authority, again, is about power and control and who benefits and who's making decisions. We've all seen the recent press about NYCHA and all these vendors getting paid, all these like kickbacks and, corruption. So in large systems, it's easier to have corruption. And in small systems too. And so in what ways, again, back to my original remarks, can we really think about democracy? Can we think about political and public education so that we can land on solutions and fight for them? Because nothing that we need to do right now that's hard is any harder than what people have fought for in the past, and not always won. But if we don't fight for them, we'll never win anything.
Thank you. Thank you, Roberto. I want to, since the question was like, can you move into a little bit more abstract? I don't know. Let's see how that goes. But so in the last years, actually the year before the pandemic, which was 2019, I was working very closely with people from the municipality of Barcelona. Because at that period they had the mayor elected. She was very much declared anti sort of neoliberal mayor. And she tried and she did quite a lot of things. And one of the main arguments of her administration was, what kind of housing do we do? She had the mandate or the idea that there needed to be a lot of affordable housing built in a country that primarily is focused on private property rights, which is kind of like, I guess, the American thing. In New York, of course, obviously is an exception, right? But and they start to consult what kind of housing should be developed. Now, they didn't manage to build a lot of housing, but part of their conclusion after a lot of consulting and talking to people and inhabitants and so on, people in the movements, it came to a very interesting conclusion. They didn't want the state or the city to build housing, right? So in short, the majority manifested against the idea of going back to a welfare state in which, the build of housing was the responsibility of the state. And I guess most of this has to do with, with the memories we all have of that period of standardization and mass development of housing, right? And that could be seen very easily here, whether you call it NYCHA or any other form of housing, right? There's a certain stigma that goes into it. I think it's much more deep than that, but that was the general sort of consensus. The other one was, we definitely don't want housing built by private developers, right? The neoliberal model is proven like time and time again. We're right now plus 40 years, which we know that it has not provided what most people want. I was working, trying to get some statistics here, but I don't think I need to bring statistics to you here. I mean, it's the level of inequalities is just so extreme, right? Any statistic you put out, it tells you how bad neoliberal idea of like having private companies think about development this has rendered disasters, right? Whether environmental or social disasters. Now, at the moment, of course, we have Hochul talking with, private developers, with Vornado and all of these people, right? Vornado is, I think, the largest landowner in the city, right? I mean, it is, I think, one or two, anyway. No, actually. No, Colombia is third and NYU is fourth, okay? I know that, because but yeah, it's somewhere around there. So, they are talking precisely about, the new 421A or the new affordable housing project or whatever, and the people that are being consulted are either these developers or the consultants of the developers that led us into these, massive disaster housing crisis that not only New York but the world in general is facing. And so that would be the McKinseys and the, PricewaterhouseCoopers and all of these bunch of criminals, right, that are there in these agencies. Now, but the people of Barcelona very clearly at some point said, we don't want this, like no more developers, please. Which begs a question, right? Which is directly in the question is like, okay, so if we don't want the backing of the welfare state or the idea of like going back into that kind of housing, if we don't want private developers to take care of housing, assuming that you believe that housing is a human right, then what is left, right? Now, back in 2014, we had done like a very theoretical exhibition that was called Uneven Growth. And I like to theorize a lot sometimes, and then we start to look, okay, so in contemporary capitalist sort of dynamics, you could say that the first wave of the 20th century was public power over decisions of anything else. That would be the welfare, kind of like state-driven. Then the neoliberal model came, which is, everything from the private prioritizes over anything else. And yes, there is absolutely, a third paradigm that we should be searching. And this is what, at the end with working with Ada Colau and the people in Barcelona, this is where they were claiming, is that the third paradigm we should be fighting for is letting people build their own housing, right? I mean, the collective production. And that, of course, entitles a much more concrete decisions. Because, I mean, this is not a theoretical exercise that the Barcelona people were doing. They were like, okay, so how do we do that, right? If it's not developers, if it's not the government, if it's more people, how do we do that? And her administration, a lot of my friends that I work with on a daily basis were involved in this. And they came with, a very clear agenda that one of the directions was to shift power dynamics or give more power to people, which is what we all want, right? I don't know what's the title of this panel, but it had to do something like that, Urbanizing for the People. Now, how do we achieve that in a city where concentrates the largest numbers of millionaires in the world is number one, the largest numbers of billionaires in the world is number one, and well, we can go on and on and on, how this works. Nevertheless, we must not forget that more than 80% of the population that we live here in the city struggle to live in the city. I mean, no matter how, like your salary range is, obviously there's that. And so there is a lot of desire for people's power. My take is that a lot of the policy that has been pushed for, specifically because of this nostalgia towards a welfare state, has avoided us to think on could we build policy to leave, more power to, let's say, the community developer, not the nonprofit developer, but like the community developer, whether it's a land trust or not, because we can discuss a lot whether land trust might be the model or not. So in Barcelona, they did, of course, it's a much smaller city. They did build, and their model, preferential model, was cooperatives. Right? And they built, each cooperative had their own governance model. They built around 60,000 units, which is not really a lot for what they needed, in that. And then, of course, the government changed, and now it's a disaster because it's a right-wing government. That happens. But the question is that I believe that our aims in terms of how we push specific kinds of policy still are in these first two spaces. Either we're pushing for more government involvement or more private involvement, right? But I don't think we're pushing enough for the more community space. So that's how I answer your question, okay?
Thank you. I think I might have a little bit more skepticism of the community as a descriptor of anything. Yes, I always do. So I would throw that out there. Like, what do we really mean by that? It can't just be a word that means a good thing without saying what that thing is. It's 7:04. We're going to wrap up at 7:30. I want to leave time for audience questions. So I'm going to throw out two questions, and you can choose which one to answer or pass on both. Okay. The first question is the one that I prepared, which is we've got two compounding existential crises, probably many more than that, but two that I want to talk about. One is we're a city that's surrounded by water and our sewer infrastructure is really old and climate change is already happening and we're going to have a lot of flooding. And the other is our housing system is totally screwed up. What we have isn't affordable and the only things we know how to build a lot of are not affordable to most people. So millions of New Yorkers are going to move very soon and we're not prepared. What do we do? What do we do about that and at what scale? And given the current, like, who owns the land, what is the role for the public in changing that at the speed we actually need? So deliberative democracy can be very important, but also very slow. And so how do we balance that need for fast and dramatic action to save lives and also not just repeat the worst histories of mass urban renewal and displacement all over again? So that's the question that I prepared. The other question that I want to offer as an alternative, if you're interested, is this really solvable? So Lynn said yes. And I personally go back and forth. Part of me feels like we know what the solutions are. We just need to build the power to do it. We know what works. Some of it we've done historically. Some of it we've just imagined, but like we know what it is. Let's do the thing. The other part of me says it doesn't work. You can't build a socialist city in the heart of the capitalist empire. It does not work. The whole thing is dependent on more and more money being generated, which would then be taxed, which would then be used for the public good. But if the money isn't being generated, if the capital goes on strike, the whole thing falls apart, which makes us very dependent on the very people we would seek to be undermining. And so when I think about it long enough, I think, no, this doesn't make sense. But it's my work to do this anyway. So if you could help me out with that. I'm posing two impossible questions. One is, what do we do about climate change, land, and housing? And the other is this really solvable in the world, in the place we live in now? So not even the world, but like this place, New York.
Well, I would say the answer to that is yes, but it's going to take a tremendous amount of hard work. And I do want to throw a bone to John Mudd and all of you and say, these are the kind of things that need to happen, because this dialogue is not happening in New York City at the level it needs to. And I'm sure most of you agree with me. And I so miss the Village Voice and many members of the print media, and I'm apoplectic over how difficult it is to get messaging out. And even more apoplectic that there's a healthy portion of the media that are calling people like us NIMBY, racists, white people. You know, I'm a little bit of an accidental tourist in this journey. I've always been involved and engaged, but not on the levels you are. But that's not what I'm running into and the people I'm running into. And it's generally a miracle that we ever win. And yet they talk about us as if we're some sort of, competing evil empire. And that is not the case. So I think we need to keep fighting the good fight. And John doing 4 things like this are important. And I'll take another one. I'm really disappointed that the Women's March on Washington didn't happen every year. I'm really disappointed they had fights at the top of the House and that fell apart. Those kind of things can't happen. We can't allow that to happen. There was a tenant organizer in the Bronx. Some of you may remember her name, Ann Devaney. She used to say, you get the government you deserve. It is that simple. Whether you want social democracy or something south of that, you need a very active democracy, and we all have to stay engaged and involved, even though it is a lot of hard work.
Rob.
I think Rob, we lost Rob.
Are you there? I see him breathing.
Yeah, Rob, we're going to go to you next, if you're ready.
He's moving.
Nothing like putting me on the spot, eh? Sam,
can pass,
thank you.
but-
You raised 2 very complicated questions, and I'll start with, can we change it? I think until we get people in power who look like us, think like us, speak like us, it'll never happen. I don't know if you can do that, because the way our political machines run is through capital, right? Can you raise enough capital to completely change elected offices in New York State? We get incremental victories. We're all proud of some of the progressive folks who have gotten into government. I don't have to name them. We know who they all are, but there's too few of them. And people will always say to me, why don't you run for elected office? I despise electoral politics, but it's the system that we've adopted. So how do you put a system in upheaval? How do you change it? I think that comes from evolution. So I'm afraid the only way we're going to get there is to overthrow what currently exists as our government. And people look at me sometimes when I use terms like that, but one of my mentors was the great Neil Smith, and I'd walk through the halls of the CUNY Grad Center. And, it was during the time that I was involved in the work of Take Back the Land. And Neil would just pass me and say, he would just stop me and say, Rob, you and Max always talk about nonviolent civil disobedience and direct action. I just want you to know the revolution is violent. And he'd walk away. And it was to open up thinking and an understanding of how you get to change and how do you realize some of these things that you want. I asked earlier, the question about complicity in our own struggles. Well, without popular and political education, we buy into stories and narratives. We believe what they want us to believe. And how do you get transformed? I don't know the perfect answer to that. So it's a challenge. I don't have the answer to either question, Sam, but every time I'm in a space with you, you make me think critically. And that's why I appreciate being in spaces with you, because you really have to look at this thing holistically and understand what we're facing. So, I may not have answered either question. Um, I feel like I'm sort of babbling, but I think about a lot of this stuff now, and again, I just want to let you guys know, I'm in a space. I feel so weird down here in Atlanta, listening to people fascinate over home ownership and what's happening in Sonoma Valley and what's happening in, this area of Michigan. It's so far removed from what we're all living through in New York City. So, thank you.
If the first question is this solvable, then climate change and our housing system, all these things are part of the this, right? And I mean, if we're really paying attention to the news, there's like a rise of fascism in this country and in other parts of the world. And so it may not be a war yet, Rob, but I don't think that the question, is this solvable in the place we live in, is an existential question. I do not think our lifestyles and standard of living is sustainable. If we are really going to adopt the kind of changes in lifestyle that we need to not reverse climate change, but just stop it from happening so fast, we would all have to really look in the mirror and decide what changes we're willing to make in our own lives. And so we're probably going to be forced, we're pretty comfortable in this country. I've lived in a country during a revolution, during a war, where most people didn't have indoor plumbing. People fight when their lives are at stake. And we're pretty comfortable here, And so I think that we are probably going to get to the point where we say, oh shit, and we start to look at each other differently and do things that are more along the lines of like solidarity, economy, and mutual aid, because we'll be forced into it. So things are going to change. Things are going to change. They're changing politically. We have, it's not just Trump. It's all kinds of people at all levels of like electoral people running for office that are talking about things that are fascist. Like in Arizona, they proposed a law, the governor vetoed it, that if there was a migrant on your property, you could shoot them. And that was just vetoed. So this is the kind of thing that's happening all over the country. The Supreme Court is hearing Johnson versus Grants Pass. That's going to give a green light to every local community that you can arrest people who have no housing. We're the only city in the whole country that has a right to shelter. The rest of the country, there aren't enough shelter beds, even if people wanted to go to shelter. And so our Supreme Court, you can guess the way it looks like that decision's going to go. That's being fast-tracked, April 22nd. Other decisions that they need to make are not being fast-tracked. So we see what's happening. Is it solvable? Like I said before, I think identifying solutions is not the same as fighting for them. But back to the question of who are we, and who is the community, we have got to get together with folks that aren't just like us, that live next door or live in our city, that are impacted by these things, just like we're doing now. A bunch of us, some of us know each other, more don't, and say, are we going to put the work in to land on something that's going to benefit the common good, and are we going to fight for it? And it's going to take, Rob used the word risk. I mean, it's not like walking around with the sign saying no justice, no peace is going to change things. And so I think we have to ask ourselves, are we ready to do the things that need to be done so that this is solvable? Not so we go back to the way things were, but we get to something that's better, because the way things were has led us to where we're at now. And we need to really go down and make a different path. Because New York is not going to be here forever, right? The sea rise alone. So I believe we can, and at least we can live our lives saying we're tried. And that matters too.
I don't know if I want to respond to your provocation of what is the community first and then so on, but I cite a little bit. Let's say, to be more precise, in Barcelona, they talked about organized collectives that wanted to push agendas of non-speculative housing. So that's what meant organized communities, right? So like when there are certain people that organized, then the resources were given to them. And in order to build, or whether is it land or whatever, but it had to have the non-speculative factor behind it, so it's not for speculation. Now, in the two questions would take forever to answer. I honestly, the more I teach a course on political ecology, and the more I've been teaching it for a few years, and the more I teach it, the more I am convinced that there's literally very little that a city can do, I mean, to address the, what's going to happen. I mean, we can build technology, dams, or like walls, but you saw exactly. I lived in the Netherlands for some time, and I mean, they got flooded like crazy, and they have the biggest, most advanced, like absolutely crazy high-tech infrastructure. And just recently, and it's not even yet, 10 years from now, when we know it's just going to get worse. This is a situation which is a level of a planetary scale, the same as capitalism in general, but that it's just so difficult for me, Sam, to look at it from like the city perspective. I think it does not permit us to look at really the scope of the dramatic changes we're about to experience. We're already started to experience. And yes, we can safeguard this place, but the question is it worth it to be safeguarded? Honestly, I mean, like, when we start building in areas where Sandy obliterated, I was the other time in Red Hook. I mean, like, what the hell is wrong with these people? I mean, why? Right? I mean, like, why would you? I'm sorry if some of you live in Red Hook, it might be, but it's just like, I mean, didn't you see the level of destruction that just a simple hurricane, which is by no means the intensity of what we're going to be receiving in the coming years, because we are going to get them, for sure. That's a given. So anyway, that is a very difficult question to address from a city perspective. And sadly, my answer to that would be, well, yeah, we can use technology, and then technology to be the fairest possible. So where do we put the boundary of the wall? Would we let the people in I don't know, in Jamaica drown or not? Those are decisions. Or should we use South Bronx as a space where, it could be flooded or not, right? These are the kinds of discussions that are being, talked about, and it goes way beyond this. And then we both read, I think you read the Kim Stanley Robinson New York 2033, I think it's called, or 43 or something like that, where it's a book that imagines New York like, totally, half of New York, of Manhattan, underwater. And the line of the water is in Madison Square Park. And so there's people, the wealthy individuals build super skyscrapers in Harlem and all over there because it's tall, right, and Inwood and so on. And then the rest, they're called the rats, the water rats, and they're people that live there. Yeah, I could see that. I could totally see that's going to happen because it's just way beyond, I think what a city can do. In relationship to the solution, I want to provide a very different perspective. I don't believe in any solution. Right? There's nothing to be solved because things are always in motion. There's like when we think about solution, we think about a mathematical problem, and well, yeah, 1 + 1 = 2, it's done, right? There's not much to solve. Housing is question is something, it's a movement, it's a motion, it's something we have to be involved constantly. And it always shifts, whether we get Donald Trump or, Bill Clinton or whoever, Eric Adams or something. Every circumstance that is around, just attacks in so many spaces that movements must understand themselves as being very flexible. So for me, it's very difficult to think about solutions and if things are solvable. There are better or, say, more just ways of addressing the issue. And those better ways, or more just ways, are ways that will take a long time. And sometimes we fail to see the long historical process in which has led us to this. This is a 500 year in the making, right, type of scenario. So it is also to expect of our movements that something like Rob was mentioning, a sudden revolution would just change everything. I mean, we have a historical experience of that, and I've worked in countries that went through this. And yeah, I can tell you, no, it just doesn't work that way. It's part of a motion, it's a long term. So the question for the majority of us is how can we put ourselves useful within this historical episode that we're living, right? And do as much as possible to try to create ruptures or imaginaries, produce new imaginaries. But so I guess I'm more in your second side, right? No, I mean, there's no, New York is so yes, we can create some frictions. Yes, we can hope for a more progressive mayor. My work depends on working with progressive governments. And I can tell you, I mean, you have 3 years or 2 years to start doing things. And then after these 2-3 years, the window is over, right? You cannot make any other change. And whatever change you can make is just so small, right? And that's sadly how we are in this sort of embeddedness. Now, a big disaster might trigger something else. We would imagine the pandemic would have done something, in terms of that. Sandy, Occupy Wall Street, all of those things. But so far, it's hard to see a major change unless a major disaster happens, like a serious war or, sadly, or a serious, very, very, bad stuff. Even worse than the worst that is happening today.
I got the benefit of listening to all of you. I really want to take questions soon, but I just wanted to pick up on something Lynn said about mutual aid and solidarity economies. I don't think those can be imposed from the top down or by any state agency, and I think that a climate disaster is the kind of situation in which people begin to form these kinds of bonds. I'll recommend a book called Degrowth by Georgios Kallis, and his argument is that if we want to save ourselves, we're going to have to consume less, and that doesn't mean that our quality of life is going to have to decline. We can, affective goods are real goods, goods like care, goods that don't have prices affixed to them, and leisure is another one, and if we got serious about consuming those things, and as opposed to all the things that we do consume, Sam, I think maybe the death spiral that you envision of needing capital and capital goes on strike, I mean, that may be less catastrophic in a situation where people have really developed affective bonds with each other and are able to maybe have a different relationship to land even. So, that's my answer.
Well, thank you, everybody, for thinking that through collectively. I've been a pretty irresponsible moderator, and it's very close to the end here, but maybe we can take a couple questions and seek a couple answers.
Hi, my name is Twee. I'm going to try to help moderate. I see one hand in the audience, and housekeeping is that if you can make it one question, please, less than 20 seconds. Your question might spur on other questions, so thank you.
Thank you. A very provocative panel. Thank you. You said that you started with land, and I would say in New York, I think the scale of New York is too big for the experiments, possibly. Landlords reign, but I don't understand how I think social housing was a critique last week that it avoids dealing with public housing, with NYCHA. And I think that's something that should be considered. But my question is, what should we do? What about squatting in Millionaire, Row? Would that be something that we would recommend? Or we talked about issues like that, so maybe some kind of actions. So I just want to put that out there.
Yeah, I think that's, squatting, people squat because they need a home, right? Other movements use squatting as a way to provoke conversation about the fact that there's empty property and it's sitting there while other people don't have anywhere to live. Rob and I got arrested together for taking over a vacant lot owned by JP Morgan Chase that was vacant for so long, it had giant trees on it. And so just to dramatize. So it really depends. I think that regardless of what the tactic is, and squatting is a tactic either to get yourself a place or to make a bigger political statement, it's not going to solve anything except for that person if they're able to hold on to the place, unless it's part of a larger strategy. And so how many people, like how many millionaire empty apartments are there? Say there's, 100,000. And 100,000 people are willing to do that and prepared to do it and know what their legal rights are. It's not, it's hard, but it's done all the time. But how is that going to get us to systemic change, I think is the question. I can't speak for anybody else, but to me, if there's a vacant building or vacant apartment and somebody can squat it and get a home out of it, good for them. But that doesn't change the system. And so the work of democratically figuring out what we want and how we're going to get there to benefit the community, is work that has to be done regardless of the tactic.
Yeah, say a couple things. One is I'm pro squatting, but if we're going to squat Billionaires Row, there's 30,000 cops who will be at the door. So doing that in New York City that's the challenge. It's not that the space isn't there, it's the police. As for public housing and social housing, I believe that our public housing is one of our forms of social housing, and the fight for social housing includes preserving the public housing that we have. And part of the way we're going to do that is by building a much bigger constituency for social housing than only the people who currently live in public housing. And so I think when our public housing has been the strongest has also been when we were building a bunch of social housing models, including more public housing, but also including limited equity co-ops and others. So I think in that way we can do it. Not only can we do it all, we're going to do a better job of preserving housing if there's more of a base for decommodified housing in the city.
There's a question in the Zoom panel.
This comes from C.B. McVeigh. Are we willing to change the financial structure within which housing is built? European socialist cities in the 1920s managed to set up systems, cooperative building societies, limited profits, etc., that built large numbers of affordable units. What is possible today?
Yeah, I'm fortunate to work a lot with different organizations in many of these countries. My one recent trip I had was in Sweden, where we, and I guess in the mindset even of Bernie Sanders or people like that, they have the best of social infrastructure. I can attest that's not true. At all. Actually, the production of these kinds of welfare have been very contentious. First of all, of course, has to do a lot with the social dynamics in relationships to racism, migration, and so forth, right? Today, they're just enclaves minorities that are don't given the rights of being, just Swedish people. But majoritarily, these were abandoned for a preferred model, which was exported by the US and other European countries, which is suburban structures, suburban ideas. And so you would see that the wealthy individuals either live in suburbs or live within the city, and then all of these, infrastructure that was built in the 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s, 60s, with very, very strong socialist ideas, you start to read them in a very different light once you also realize where the money of that came from. And this is something very interesting that we don't talk too much about. The welfare of welfare countries came from, one in the case of Sweden, from tremendous amount of environmental exploitation or expropriation with mining, specifically steel mines, but also that included the displacement of native populations that were in the north. In order to take advantage of, of them, they produce this housing there. And then, of course, we can extend that to sort of neo-colonial, sort of extractivist industries in which all of the wealth was extracted from them to be such, a good beneficial, like having a benefit for their own people, let's put it this way. And so I don't think we look correctly at welfare states. I mean, I guess what I'm trying to say here is like, we should really look at what produced the welfare. I mean, where the money was coming from. The money was coming from also plundering countries like my country. I'm Mexican, right? I can tell you the amount of money that was taken out of Mexico from all kinds of extractivist industries, but also labor issues and so forth, in which all of these countries can actually say that, okay, we're providing this welfare structure. So I'm not arguing against the possibility of having different mechanisms in which to finance housing. I guess what I'm trying to say is that looking at the mechanisms of the past, there's much more hidden that I consider negative in these structures than the positive aspects that we would find. Now, in terms of community organization, in terms of financing models in which taxation, the tax basis was used in order for financing these, definitely, I actually believe that one of the big spaces of activism we have not occupied is fiscal policy. Fiscal policy, there's so much to do. The amount of money that private developers get from subsidies from fiscal policy, especially when let's say the recent one, 421A that just ended, it's crazy. I mean, it's really insane. Or let's look at another subsidy that we don't talk too much about. How much is one person in a shelter today in New York City? Is close to $400 per day per person. So one person, my tax dollars are paying $12,000 rent, which is not even a rent, it's a shelter for one person. Imagine a family of 3, right? How much is that? What could I rent a month for a $30,000 apartment here? All of that is subsidies for the private industry of the homeless, schema. And so all of that has been organized at that level, right? The tax dollars are being used. Police. Okay, what can I say about police? Similar situation. You see, we have, I guess, from our taxation base, a lot of resources that are going into spaces we really don't like. And so that is a space, because of its complexity and that abstraction, is very difficult for us to conceive how can we tap into that, right? And, or how can we ask for that, right? Or move these sort of fiscal policy issues. I think it's a fascinating area to discuss. And
One little quick thing to add, the mortgage interest deduction. So if you're a homeowner, the more expensive your house is, the more of a deduction you get. If you buy a house, you don't have a lot of money, you buy a house, you may just get the standard deduction of $12,000. And so that's like an upside down subsidy for wealthy homeowners.
And Section 8, my God.
I want to draw out something positive, which actually started with the organization that you founded, Lynn, which is, as part of the research that you did on vacancy, I think members of, if I'm not mistaken, members of Pictures of Homeless became cognizant of some community cooperative solutions that were being implemented at Cooper Square, and as a result decided that land trust might be one small way to move. And now there are land trusts throughout the city, and I'm not, I don't want to I don't want to over celebrate this, but the city government has dedicated money to land trust infrastructure and helped land trusts employ full-time organizers and in a couple of cases secure properties. And that's a bright spot, I think, as much as, and I know that there's a lot of critical things to be said about land trusts as well and about the outcomes because they are also existing in this financing system, which is very heavily weighted toward extraction by financial actors. But I do think that there is some evidence that we can get the government that we ask for and help it to be the government that we deserve.
Thank you. There's one more question on, oh, did you have a, Rob, did you want to speak?
If, Miguel made some comments that I thought deserve lifting up. This idea of organizing around fiscal policy, which we don't do. Anything that has to do with economics, we seem to cast to the side, but we have to get involved in those conversations. I think somebody that everybody on this panel respected, the great Peter Marcuse, an urban planner, years ago when I was a member of Picture the Homeless, we were building a right to the city platform for New York City. And in the opening introduction to that platform, we mentioned that we're going to ask the current mayor to do something. And Peter got upset and threw the platform on the table and said, Rob, you know what's wrong with this? You know what's wrong with this? You don't ask the mayor. You're a community member. You tell him, and to hear Peter in his anger making that statement, I think that's what we have to do. It's about us rising up and taking control of our situation. But again, I'm going to question our willingness to rise up and really push back. When you talk about fiscal policy and economics, people push back on you. When I go into the community and talk about, Rob, that's that academic shit. You deal with that, right? No, we all have to deal with it. Maybe I can help simplify the language, but it's something we all have to deal with.
I'm not a founder of Picture the Homeless. Picture the Homeless was founded by two homeless men, Anthony Williams and Louis Hagen, so I'm always very careful to lift them up because sometimes we, without knowing, erase how organizations start or who really are leaders. I did meet them at the first meeting and I was there for a long time, but I never want to erase them and the work that they did.
Appreciate that.
Yeah.
Can we organize a boycott of corporations that support privatization of NYCHA? How can we get the federal government to provide more funding to save Section 9?
I'm curious to know which companies are being described in the first part. Certainly open to it, but I think the main companies that are invested in privatizing public housing are the developers that take over management. I don't know how we as consumers boycott them, but I'm certainly open to it. And if the questioner wants to reach out, let me know. In terms of funding Section 9, this is a major struggle, and it's one that we have to be fighting in New York, but we can't only be fighting in New York, but we do have a structural problem, which is that a very large amount of our country's public housing has already been first destroyed, then privatized. And so the remaining stock needs to be organized across state lines because New York, this can't be seen as a New York issue, or else the federal government as a whole will not fund it to the level needed. I think there was a little bit of naive hope that having a Senate Majority Leader and a Congressional Minority Leader from New York City would achieve that, but it hasn't, and I don't think it can. So scaling up the organizing beyond New York is crucial to saving New York's public housing, I would say. Anybody else?
Well, there was a Green New Deal for public housing proposed a few years ago, and then that actually made it into the Build Back Better legislation that got very close. I think the national stage is really the place to focus organizing, and I agree with Sam that it needs to be to happen across states. And, I think Section 9 housing is an absolute asset that we should not allow neglect to destroy. And that kind of goes back to some of what Sam was saying earlier about the kind of creating a broader constituency for social housing and then including public housing in that arena as a major pillar of social housing that without which we could not do anything with respect to social housing.
Really quick question, just because a lot of people here are professors and it seems like you guys have taught at lots of different institutions and stuff. Do you guys find hope in each year kind of touching a handful of students that are in the fields that we're touching on today? Do you guys find hope in seeing them critically think about the issues, see where they want to place themselves in the field after the institution, and seeing that, wow, that's going to help? Does that create a strong hope there?
I've seen a big shift in the last, I guess, 4 or 5 generations. I mean, teaching for 23 years, 24 years. So in the last, I would say 5 years, let's say a little bit before the pandemic already, you would see that the younger people, yeah, they're not buying anything, right? I mean, they're like, there's a complete shift. And like they know that things are not okay, right? And they don't believe anymore on a lot of things. Of course, they're in TikTok and Instagram, which of course produces a different kind of relation to social structures and environment. But yeah, it's amazing. I can say that. I mean, yeah, I love it. I mean, I love engaging with these young generations, and these perhaps the thing that gives me more hope of anything. Yeah, because we fail. I mean, we're doing our best. I mean, I think we're doing what we know what to do, but as a generation, man, I mean, it's just horrible. I mean, what these last generations did, what my parents' generation did, it's unforgivable. I mean, like they tipped it over. Right.
This is Rob. I just real quick. Obviously, I have a relationship with a lot of people in the room, and I teach in the program that Miguel leads. And I'm here in Atlanta because of a graduate of that program. She graduated in 2019. But whatever we taught her in the design and urban ecologies program at the new school stuck. And she's taken that and she's challenging a narrative within Habitat to Humanity, which is huge. Like, let's bring this guy in to really shake up this conference. And that's my role here, to really make people think a little bit differently. But I admire the young folks who think outside of the box. The other one is, there's a couple more in that graduated from the program that we both teach in. Unlock NYC. It was founded by somebody who graduated from the program. Anti-eviction mapping project. I can go on and on and on. I sit here today in Atlanta feeling like a proud dad. I embarrassed her in the first talk that she led to say I mentored her when she was a student at this program. But obviously, whatever Miguel, myself, and others in the program taught her stuck with her, right? And I see that all the time. I also see it in law school, folks. When I give lectures at law schools, I was in Miami over the weekend. So I was there at the University of Miami at the invitation of University of Miami Law School. Student was back there from San Diego. She graduated in 2018. We had dinner together because she wants to know how she can shake up a situation in San Diego. So yeah, like Miguel, I have a lot of hope for the young people, and I think we have to think creatively that we're organizing for the future, right? The changes we talk about tonight may not happen in our lifetime, but it is our job to leave a set of tools for those young folks to finish the job. And I'm pretty happy with the folks that are coming up behind us from what I've seen as I travel around the country.
I've been involved in all different kinds of education in different kinds of settings. So, for example, at Picture the Homeless, we had an organizer trainee program that was very intentional for members to learn organizing skills. I learned organizing skills as a tenant at Cooper Square way before the Land Trust. Not necessarily in a classroom setting, but being welcomed into meetings and being given, responsibilities and being accountable to other people and having to challenge myself to learn new skills to do those things. At at the new school, I teach there. I've taught at Ostos Community College, at Queens College. I've run adult literacy programs. And I think the most important thing that we can do as educators, whether it's in a university or a community-based program, is to, one, kind of create a spark, create a space where folks can say, let's think about this thing that I've been taught to think about this way. Let's think about it in a different way. That there are more than one way to look at things, and that actually people outside my own community might think differently, or people in other countries might have figured things out in different ways, so that we start to question, right? We start to think critically. I think that it can be really challenging with folks in university that are paying a lot of money, and that if they have an end goal of, I'm going to get this job, I'm going to get this particular kind of job and this career, and I need to think a certain way to be able to do that job. I mean, a lot of the people that we dealt with the beginning of Nicely and the East Harlem and Barrio Community Land Trust were young people not long out of university that were like, oh, no, you can't do this. Or they had no idea of the housing history in New York City. They didn't know about sweat equity. They didn't know that the city used to give apartments to people for $250 each. They didn't know they didn't know that the Division of Asset Management used to be called the Division of Alternate Management. Like, they just didn't even have a sense of those histories. So I'm very careful as an educator, regardless of the environment, is to not necessarily think I'm going to tell people a bunch of things they didn't know, but invite them to think about things in a new way. And that can be really hard. That can be really, really hard. I'm not, as always, hopeful, just because of the social pressures that everyone is under. And I encourage my students to find organizations that if there's things that are resonating with them, I guarantee you there are organizations in New York City that are working on this issue from a justice perspective. I push them to consider sources like participatory action research projects that almost every community organization does or relies upon, that really think through where they're getting their information. And I think when you do that, when people like cross the threshold, they'll never go back. They'll never go back, but it can be challenging to get to that.
I feel like Miguel and Lynn and Rob kind of said it all. I'm hopeful. It's also discouraging sometimes to realize what kind of a system that you're operating within. But I love my students and I'm very proud of them.
We have one last question on Zoom, unless you want something to add.
I'm not an academic, but I do have a 25-year-old daughter, and you'd be very pleased with how she conducts herself.
This question's coming from Alex. Why can't we force developers to go through a lottery process whereby if they win, then they're allowed to build all market rate buildings? Tons of tenants need to win an HPD lottery, and it's hard to win, so why not impose a lottery for developers? As far as like the big notorious ones.
That's an interesting idea. So the proposal is developers win have to enter a lottery, and if they win the lottery, then they can build all market rate housing, and if they don't, then what?
I guess have to do like an 80-20 or something. I don't know. It's just like, it just seems so unfair and like Hunger Games to make us go through a lottery and then they can just rule the roost.
Right. So, I mean, it would make a good short story. First, I'll say, like, write that out. Whoever wrote that question, like, write it out as a description of, like, let's say that this happened. What would happen next? The answer to why that doesn't happen, I think, is like the opening framing that I gave for this panel, which is that this is a capitalist democracy in which everybody has to exist on land, but only some people own it, and we give a tremendous amount of rights privilege and opportunity to whoever owns land and property on top of it. There isn't a mechanism for doing what you're doing, but I think just pointing it out shows how kind of absurd some of the systems we have right now is.
But I would say, and this is just me talking, don't get mad, get even. And I think the suggestion at looking into the finances of things, or just in general facts, and pressing them, and that's why I talked about the press and the absence of the kind of press we used to have. But it's a long journey, 500 years, everything builds on itself. Robert Kennedy talked about ripples of hope. I don't mean to get so, but I really think that's where that kind of stuff I think can be fun, and sometimes I'm told if it feels that good, don't write it. But I do think we've got to focus on continuing to build a fact set. And in this Penn Station thing, as people have pointed out, as for instance, that James Dolan is getting like a $46 million annual tax break while they're cutting libraries and cutting all sorts of cultural and other organizations. Though that kind of data repeated often enough helps. And a lot of the work that's done on campaign finance work and showing where Vornado's donations are going to, all that kind of stuff is really important to just keep doing. I'm not saying there aren't occasions where things like that don't make a lot of sense. The problem is the developer is going to mishear that and say, "Oh yeah, we want a casino," and they'll miss that you're talking about a very different kind of lottery. But I like the ideas of really being active, getting facts, pounding the facts, and then just not letting anybody off the hook. Just a constant accountability journey.
Any last thoughts? I thought we had to get out of here at 7:30. Turns out we have till 8, so we have like 5 minutes. If there's any final thought that anybody has, a thing that they hope to say, or something that somebody else said that they wanted to respond to, I want to give an opportunity to do that.
Sam, this is Rob. I just want to, when you talk about development, I'm going to break it down to this, and I've always said this, and I say this a lot publicly. Profit is a drug, and developers are never satisfied with the drugs that they're hooked on, and that drug is profit. There's never enough. I've had people come to me and say, why won't the landlord do this, or why won't they do this in my building? Because they're not making profit from you. That's what they care about. That's what they deeply care about. They care about profit. And until we understand how capital flows and we don't push back on this idea of capitalism and its effect on society, we're in for a long battle. We have to understand the economics that we're faced with every day in the economic system in this country. And until that changes, we're pushing a rock up a hill.
Yeah, I want to raise another very important matter that I don't think we pay so much attention to, which is not long ago. I mean, and Sam, you might know exactly because this is what you do in a job in your like policy analysis. New York City came out with a report that there's never been since the 1960s such a low vacancy rate, right? And I think they were mentioning something like 1.3% vacancy rate. And I was just looking at that report. I was just saying, like, there's something wrong with this report, right? In one hand, I mean, it was a very, I guess there's a methodology in, saying like what is vacant. And then what that drives, I mean, basically the ideology of putting that forward, immediately Eric Adams, comes out and says we need to build more housing. And there's a whole mechanism that we have in our minds that the way to address the housing question is that we don't have enough housing. And these kinds of reports, in my view, emphasize to society that, the reason that we are paying so much for rent is because there's not enough housing. That also enforces or believes in the competition and about the supply and demand agenda that is so also embedded in our education. I don't believe in that. I don't believe in the supply and demand in housing. And there's many reasons why, right? First of all, because I think it's a human right, and I think housing should be part of that commodity market. Okay, so that's an ideological one. But in principle, Many years have passed that have shown us that even though we have a vacancy occupation in the many luxury housing units that have been built in the city, we can actually see that not too many lights at night are being lit up in those buildings, right? Although there's, of course, an occupation. And many of these buildings or many of these units are owned by a very specific kind of owner that might have many of them, et cetera. And we have a construction of a lot. That's my take on this, but we must do another survey of actually what is vacant and what is not in relation to, I know that Sam is dying to intervene here because I mean, that's what Sam does. So I'm even scared of saying this. The thing that I want to emphasize is the following. Since approximately, I would say 20 years ago, when financialization of the housing market started to become really rampant, one thing that we must think about is that housing or any real estate property or any land-based property is no longer profitable in relationship to its occupation. This has changed dramatically. You know, Marx had a thing that said fixed capital. Fixed capital is very difficult to move, right? You cannot sell a house in one day. It takes time. The New School has been trying to sell its luxury mansion for $20 million, and so far I don't think anyone has, you know, so it's a difficult sell, right? Marx said, yeah, the property land, it's a fixed capital asset, and it's very difficult to put in the market. Financialization changed this. I have had discussions with like super high-end developers don't ask me why I was in this discussion, but I asked this guy, like, you know, are you actually, you know, do you want this to be vacant or not? And this person says, you know, we don't care because that vacant building is part of our portfolio, and that portfolio is already leverageable, and that leverageability makes my vacant unit completely liquid, right? I can get a loan for as much as I want because I can demonstrate. And so there is zero interest of renting, for this developer specifically, or lowering the price.
Well, and
because
you can also offset his tax liability.
you can offset as tax liability, and also for lowering the price, because this is, if they lower the price, their portfolio's value lowers, right? So they can keep it at a fictitious level or even make it higher, even though if it doesn't rent or sell or whatever. We are facing with this thing at the moment, so there's also something that must be, you know, like envisioned in terms of policy, dynamics, and all of that kind of stuff to really avoid this from continuing to happen, because this is happening, right? Our buildings that traditionally were there for housing people don't make money for housing people, right? They make money for being just a commodity, and it's okay if they're empty. And this is a huge another rabbit hole that I believe we also need to explore further, which takes that logic of supply and demand completely into a different, I mean, I guess it obliterates it, and that's my view. You can have as much supply, but if these people are not renting it to the price that is according, or if they're not available to us, you know, the demand will still be up. But Sam, I know you were dying on this, you know.
Sam's going to let me jump in. The housing vacancy survey does not count all the vacant apartments. It only counts the ones that you've seen that are boarded up or bricked up for decades. They're not counted. They're not included in the housing vacancy survey from our understanding from HPD. But there's one city, or it's not a city agency, Con Ed is the agency that knows what apartments have people living in them or not. Because if every single unit has electric meter, some have a gas meter, and so it would not be difficult to have a real understanding of how many units of housing are vacant in New York City. And I have a vacant apartment in my building. They're not renting it out because the tenant of record that moved out and passed away was paying $800 a month. And the landlord is going to take it as a tax write-off. The first sleep out we did at Picture the Homeless in front of a vacant building, we pretended that we wanted to rent the storefront that was for rent. And there were vacant apartments upstairs. And we said to the landlord, oh, you know, but we don't know if we want to open our dress shop in there, and then y'all are going to be fixing up upstairs and there'll be dust. And they said, we have no intention of rehabbing the upper floors because we make plenty of money from the storefront, and we will not make money from renting out those apartments. That's what they told us, and I don't know if it's still empty or not.
Okay, I just want to say a final thing before closing. I agree with a lot of the big picture of what was said, but I do think the small picture matters. And it's because the landlords are the ones attacking the quality and truth of that survey. The tenants actually really need that survey. That survey is how we continue rent stabilization. Yeah. That is the legal purpose of that survey. That's why the report comes out. It's not to justify Eric Adams' development priorities. It's for an entirely other and much older purpose. So I want us to hold on to that. That's actually a very good survey. Like, we can do other things. And the survey also does count apartments that are not up for rent. It just doesn't go toward the vacancy threshold, that 1.4%. Anyway, I'm throwing a lot out there. I just don't want us to give up faith in that survey. It's actually very important. We can do other things, but as long as we want rent stabilization to exist in the city, we need that survey every 3 years. So anyway, it's been a great conversation. Thank you all for attending, and thank you on Zoom. Thank you to Rob in Atlanta for joining us, and thank you to our panelists right here. Keep on fighting.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sam, for your moderation. Good night, everybody.
So maybe we get the council people to make the Con Edison come up with those numbers for us. Follow Bill. Anyway, just want to say thank you for being here. It was a wonderful conversation. Samuel Stein, everybody. Brilliant. Thank you for moderating this. Miguel. If you haven't watched his videos, please do. He's brilliant. He gets right down and he doesn't hold back, as you heard him here. Okay. And Len, she's been in the fight for a long time, and I really appreciate meeting you here. And I've met you before, but I really appreciate you being here on this panel. It's wonderful to have you. And Laura. First time, I just met her here for the first time. We talked on, prepping this meeting and so forth on meetings, but I just met her, and brilliant addition. And Sam and I worked together with the coalition to stop Vernado with all the destruction, and they want to build a river-to-river commercial district. They want to build it. They wanted to build it during the pandemic. This is what they do. They can profit off of building, and they don't have to rent them out, whatever, to commercial. They make money with their tax dollars, and they ruin a lot of opportunities for housing. And so that's, and Miguel, when you said 500 years, that makes me sad. There's a lot of pain out there. There's so much pain out there. And I see it every day. I've been in Midtown for a long time, and I see it every day. And it infuriates me, and I know we have to work together. If I leave you guys with one thing, solidarity, please. Solidarity. Oh, and Rob, I'm sorry. Rob, of course. Rob has been a mentor to my council. He's been with me for a little bit. He's got a lot of wisdom. I can't tell you how much I appreciate you, Rob. I really can't. He's been there, and he's teaching and fighting the good fight, and it's great to have you all. And I want to my hats off to everybody here. Okay, thank you for being here. And I do want to recognize Lacey. Lacey's been volunteering. She's done the social media. Wonderful work she's been doing. She's been working her tail off. And Twee, where'd she go? Twee, where are you? How's that so? It's her birthday, everybody. Happy birthday, Twee. And David, thanks for having us. Thanks for having us here at the People's Forum. He's in the booth. And I see some Renee's here, Selena's here. I see some people who live in Fulton, Elliott, Chelsea. We've been coalescing, and we're trying to beat them back. And thank you again. you guys have a good night, and we'll look forward to doing another series closer towards the end of the year, and see what we can come. We're going to take this. We'll pull out some goodies out of it. We'll put it on Zoom. We'll put the events on Zoom. We'll try to drive some actions. You guys came up with a lot of good stuff, and we'll see what we can do for driving some actions, and hopefully you'll get involved with this. Thanks again.